Well, during World War II, living on reserve was quite hectic because my father was in World War II, and then we waited for him to get home, and we didn't see him very often. And even before that, he worked on the CPR. He was a bridge builder, and we never saw him half the time. Maybe twice a year we saw him. He'd come home and visit us. And so during World War II, growing up on reserve it was always concerned about where our dad was. That's what all it was. And we'd listen to the news, see what was happening, and see, because they used to list the dead and they tell you after about a week's time, if you got a letter first, then they'd let you know that if they were killed in action. Well, I'll tell you, we went through that. We had just finished our training and we were waiting for us to fly overseas and do our part in the Korean War. But then, just before we were able to leave, then we got word that they had surrendered, so we didn't have to go. We were all ready to go, we were all trained and everything, and I knew I'd be going up in the airplane all the time, and then that was pretty dangerous going up there because that's where you got killed all the time.
I'd like to go back to the First World War because that is when the Indians started joining the army, and the reason why they really joined was because they were getting restless. Young men of the day were getting very restless, and the reason why they were being very, very restless was the fact there that they couldn't leave the reserve without a permit. Anywhere you wanted to go, if you had a job with a farmer around the surrounding area, you had to go to the Indian agent, get a permit so that you can go and work for that farmer, and you had to indicate the number of days that you'd be working. Or anything, or anywhere else that you might have found employment. You couldn't go and visit on the next reserve to go and visit your relatives. Everything was on a permit system at that time. And when the First World War broke out, all the young men heard through the grapevine that you can join the army without having to have a permit to leave the reserve. So a good number of them had left. But there is a number of chiefs too of the day that were very reluctant to send their young warriors off to war. And the ones that were reluctant to send their young warriors to war was, they said, in the treaties we don't have to fight for Canada. That was one of the questions that was posed to the commissioner that made the Treaty 4. He asked if there ever was a war and Canada got involved in it. One of the chiefs there said, "Would you expect our warriors to fight a white man's war?" The commissioner of the day there, Alexander Morse, told him, "No, we don't expect you to fight a white man's war, but we would expect you to help in protecting this country and protecting your families. And if you didn't, you'd be looked at in a very cowardly manner." But the Indian just wanted to make sure that they were honoring their treaty promises. And then from there on, when the Indians started joining the various armed forces like the Army and the Air Force, there was no real Air Force in the First World War, but in the Second World War it came about. But the First World War veterans were the ones that really, really got into a tough battle. And that is where Canada really made its name. There's a couple of places there that the French and the other forces couldn't take. It wasn't until the Canadian First Army took, I think it was Vimy Ridge and other places there, and that's when Canada became a good name for itself, and they knew that they had real fighting soldiers, and a lot of our Indian men were fought in that war. In the First World War, right across Canada, there are about 4,500 Indians that served in various regiments, battalions, service corps, and other armed forces. The Second World War, I was only 5 years old, and I remember the morning that several of our young men were leaving. I had a brother that was leaving that morning. His name was Charles. And I knew my mother was very sad. They didn't like to see their young men off to war because they didn't know whether they'd come back or not. They felt sad. All the ladies, the women of the day there, the mothers of those boys that were leaving, they just felt very sad, and they used to talk about it, and they would say, I wonder if he'll come back. Well, in the same way that he left, in the same condition or in the same situation or healthy person that he was. And that was their biggest concern, the women, the grandmothers. And they would pray. They would see them pray whenever there's any kind of a cultural, spiritual event. You would all see the grandmothers and the mothers go to those events and ask elders to pray for their boys, for their nephews, for their brothers and sons. That was it used to be so sad to watch these women worrying all the time. I remember that because my mother was one of them. So that was my knowledge of the Second World War. They went into different battalions, regiments. One of the famous regiments that they joined were known as the Saskatchewan 1622nd Saskatchewan Horse Regiment. And the other one where a good number of our Indian boys joined was the Regina Rifle Regiment. There we had a good number of native soldiers in that battalion. And then we had a good number of them that joined with the Royal Canadian Artillery. And I remember the ones that were in the artillery, those were the big guns that you shot at a distance and whatnot. And those guns were loud whenever you shot them out. And at that time they had no ear protectors, no earplugs, no nothing. And a lot of those veterans that were in the artillery, shortly after they came home from the war, they all went deaf because on the sound of the backblast of the guns and everything, sometimes you'd feel as if your head was going to be split or anything like that from the sound of the big blast of those firing of those artillery guns. As for the Korean War, I didn't even know where Korea was. Never heard of it before till I heard some Indians were joining up for the Korean War. They give you a year's training for combat duty. And that training that you get that training that you get in preparation for the war is some terrific. It's something to really prepare you to, you never expect what's going to happen, and most of the training is done at night because that's the worst time to be in the battle is at night. You keep hearing things, you see things, you know that the enemy's across there, you can't see them. So that's about the scariest moments of the whenever you're in the battlefield.
Well, I enlisted in Regina at one time. That was my second choice. My first choice was the RCMP. So I wanted to be the first RCMP that was Aboriginal, and which I would have been, because I already had taken 6 weeks training in Glavik, and during the summer months of my vacation. So I went to the Air Force for a simple reason. I had already been in the Army with Cadet Corps, and then I knew what it was like. So from my experience for enlisting, it was no problem, because half of my life I was always gone from home, and I was either with the Army or with the RCMP or whatever, so it didn't make much difference to me. And then eventually they had posted, I went to St. John, Quebec, and then from there, after 6 weeks of training, and which you virtually have to, you're on the run at all the times. You never hardly ever, from place to place, you're always running full speed. So from there, I went to Centralia, and that was there. You're always busy there, because that was a NATO controlled environment there, and that there's Danish, English, Turkish, everything. NATO, whoever was in NATO, that's where they trained their pilots. They came to Ontario there, and that's where I had a lot of training. I changed a lot of radios in there, and every time you change the radio, you had to go up, and that's why. And they made sure you paid your 30 hours every month, so you can get your flight pay. So I made it every month. So every time that wasn't much, it was about $45 every month, but still $45 in days was lots, you know.
I left the reserve. Well, in those days too, there was hardly any cars. Anybody that joined up, you had to walk to campsite to catch the train. And the train left at 8 o'clock every morning. So there was 3 of us that joined up from Cody that time too. That was in April of 1952, after my brother came home from Korea. He went in first, and then we joined up. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was Regina was the place that you had to go and enlist. We knew we had to head for number 9 PD, and that's where all the enlistments took place. So we had enough sense to take a taxi. Somebody told us, when you get into the city there, and you have to take a cab to the depot. And the next morning, all the ones that had been accepted to join the armed forces would be brought into one room, and you had to swear our allegiance to the King and country, Canada. Then from there we were accepted to join the armed forces. Right after that we did that, they would give us 5 days leave to go home and get your things in order and whatnot. So you got 5 days. Your first leave was 5 days right after enlistment. And after my 5th day, we went back to Regina, and then that's when everybody went their separate ways. Some went to Calgary, some went to Winnipeg, and there's a couple of us that went to Camp Shiloh. We ended up with the artillery, and that was the artillery camp in Camp Shiloh, Manitoba. So we had to take the train there from there, and took us about 3 or 4 hours, and we got there, and we were picked up in a military vehicle. We were taken to the barracks, told to wait there and wait till we got the NCO to take us over to the quartermasters where you would pick up your rifle and your uniform and all the things that you would need in order to become a soldier. So that was the first portion of the enlistment in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Well, I took my training in Norvet, Saskatchewan as a cadet. That's the first time. I didn't realize at the time what it was for. And from there I went to Clear Lake, Manitoba. I took about 2 months training down there. Then I joined the Canadian Guards in 1954. And I joined in Regina, Saskatchewan, number 9 PD. From there I was shipped to Campbell-Cartier in Quebec. Then without realizing that it was bilingual, French and English. And that's where my problem started. They would talk for half an hour in French and half an hour in English. So you can imagine how long that was. For me, I didn't know French at all. So from there, after my basic training, I went to Camp Gagetown, which is New Brunswick. Was there for 8 weeks. So after I finished with that, we came back to Campbell-Cartier. We did a lot of training there again, that's when they told us that we might be going to Korea. But they had canceled it, which a lot of guys were happy, but it didn't matter to me wherever I went. That's what I was there to see the world.
Military life, like I said, is altogether different from civil life. It's very rigid, regimental, well-disciplined, and this is where you start taking orders. And you don't talk back to an NCO. If you think you know more than the NCO, you'll soon be told that to shut up and just listen, take orders. You have to take orders and accept. But you eventually get into that. Like I said, when we were going for our equipment, we were falling outside in 3 rows, 3 ranks, and marched to the quartermaster stores. And this is where, again, you line up. You will line up for everything in the Army. You line up for your equipment, you line up for your meals, you line up for whatever is going to happen. You're issued with your uniforms, and then that's it. Then you're brought back to your barracks, and then you start having to, they teach you how to iron your uniform, how to iron your shirts, and how to polish your boots. You've got to be spick and span for the first morning's parade that you're going to be inspected with from an officer, the sergeant, and the NCO, other NCO. As for how we were treated as Indian soldiers, we were treated equal, because the first thing the sergeant said that the first parade that we are on, that we are all equal. Nobody's any better than anyone, no matter what nationality you are. If anyone here is discriminatory or tries to say racial comments to you, and we know about it, you're in for it. So there's absolutely no discrimination in the armed forces. Even though you know some of those young guys are coming with a negative attitude towards the native people, but they soon get that out of them. They soon get that out of them because you're working with them, you're training with them, and they know exactly where you're coming from and what your thoughts are on everything, because you'll have to work as a team. That's when team building starts, right from day one. When you go out and it's your turn to go out scouting, what Indians call scouting, If you're picked by the sergeant that you're going to go out tonight, scouting is you go up into the enemy lines and try and see where you can find them, what they're doing, try and get a count of how many troops there is there. And you have to be really, really quiet about it. You have to be silent, no talking, just observe. You're trained to use your eyes. You're trained to use your eyes and your ears. You have to have a real keen sense of what you're really coming onto. Sometimes you're coming onto something that could be very, very serious to your fellow comrades. So you got to come back, sneak back to your lines and tell them what you've seen, how many troops there was of the enemy, and things like that you have to really keep your eye on.
I think I was treated a lot better as a soldier than I was treated when I was in school. Because in school, they didn't treat us very good. I was at the residential school for 8 years in Lorette. And I hardly seen my parents. When I got to Quebec City, I took 6 weeks of basic training. We had to run every time we had to go somewhere. We could march. That was and if we did walk, but when we got back to the barracks, they would say you have to do so many push-ups or you have to do this and that. But it was kind of rough life, but when you got used to it was quite disciplined. That's what and you can't call a person a name. They couldn't call me that I'm an Indian. If they heard that, well, they used discipline. We got along together after we got to know each other.
When we returned from the Korean War, we weren't treated very good. In fact, all the veterans, it wasn't only the Indian veterans that weren't treated good, because we as Korean War veterans always say that it's the forgotten war. Nobody really recognized it. When it first started, they said it was a conflict, that it was supposed to be nothing but peacekeeping duty, no action, no nothing. But it was altogether different when it started June 25th, 1950. It was a real battle. They got into the thick of it, and the first battalion from the Canadian Army that went into the Korean War was the second battalion of the PPCLI. And they made a good name for themselves. They really fought hard. They hung onto a hill one time when they were being run over by the North Koreans and the Chinese. Chinese were the ones that were involved with the North Koreans. They were taken up for the North Korean army. The Chinese and the Russians were supplying the machinery, the guns and weaponry and everything like that. And Canada, well, we supported the South Korean army, and Canada, United States, and the UN forces, the United Nations. That's how we had so many different countries playing the role or fighting the North Koreans. There's Australians, New Zealanders, any other country that belongs to the UN. And Canada really made a name for itself. And the thing that happened here was the ones that got killed in Korea, that was the difference too, was there was 526 Canadian soldiers that got killed in Korea. in a matter of 3 years. And if you got killed in action, it was the same with the Second World War or First World War. Wherever you got killed, they left you. You got buried in that country. Not like today in Afghanistan, they bring them all home. And if they get killed in Afghanistan, they bring them home, ship the body home, and have a big parade for them and whatever. But for us, there was nothing. If you got killed, that was it. Because I remember one guy here, he only had one night to go. We went on rotation. Whenever you served, whenever your unit was to go to Korea, it was supposed to be for 12 months. In fact, all units served 12 months, not like the ones that are going to Afghanistan. They only go for 6 months. We had to serve 12 months. My unit served 14 months. I think our unit was the one that served the longest. But I remember, and it was on a rotating basis, and then I remember one guy, we called him Smiley. He only had one night to go. Even on that last night, he was still in action. And he was bragging and kind of laughing at us. He said, "You poor souls, you have a good 12 months to go yet. Me, I only have one night." He said, "One night." And you know, that poor bugger, he didn't make it that night. He got all smashed up, a shell exploded right in his stomach, and there he was. He didn't come home. He got blasted all over you. We had to pick up the medics had to pick up his flesh from along the hill all over. Like, that's how his body was just scattered. And that was awful to all of us. Say, what if that happens to us? What if that happens to me? That's the first thing you do. You think of it. Say, what if that happens to me on my last night of action? So we used to be very weary. We used to be weary and think about that a lot. But that's the name of the game. You do your part. And name of the game too is you fight. You got to be able to try and survive as much as you can. In fact, you start to get good at it. You know how to protect yourself, how to protect your body, your buddies, because that's what you're trained for. If anything happens to your buddy here, you could try and look after him to the best of your ability. We're all thinking of each other. If you're going to be an individual, you'll never make it. You've got to be, you're on a buddy system there. Become real close, just like brothers by the time of your first year of training. The discipline that you get, the training that you get, and the respect that you get from your buddies. And that's the ideal thing. I always remember that. The quality of life for the veterans when they returned home was very shameful. And that was one of the reasons why the veterans try to take the government to court. There used to be a dependent allowance while your husband, if you were married and you joined the army, there was an allowance there for your wife. And there was an allowance there if you had children. And those were reduced because the Indian agent said the Indian women didn't deserve the full entitlement of what other non-native wives were receiving. They asked Veterans Affairs to send the wives checks to their office, and then they would reduce the amount and keep it, or stated that they would keep it in trust till after the war, till their husbands came home. A lot of these women lost their dependent allowance on account of that.
When you think about war, like why we had to serve, well, we didn't have to join. We weren't conscripted or anything, but we felt that, you know, being Native people, this land was our land, and we were willing to do anything to protect it. And seeing as that we serve as protectors of the land, I feel it was simply our duty to join in any conflict that our country had. And and I felt it was right, you know. That's the reason why I joined too. The war we see today is quite a bit different. It's mostly all done with guided missiles, and you're a long ways from the war. You know, you're not right in it all per se, and then you're firing way offshore, about 5-10 miles off the shore, and then you fire into a spot where you are, and then all the Canadians do now, they're just cleanup men. We go up and we clean up everything after the damage has been done, and then we get rid of all the dead shells, the duds, and everything like that. And that's what we do. And not like the Americans. The Americans, then they're right in the thick of battle because it's their war. We're just peacekeepers. And that's the difference between the war then and now. Nowadays we don't have so much to do, but we still get just as many killed by roadside bombings and stuff like that. Actually, it's more dangerous now than it was then before. At least you could see the enemy. Nowadays you don't see the enemy. They just seem to be there and they sneak up on you.
A lot of the countries, they don't have freedom. They're under dictatorship and everything like that. And when you get under dictatorship, it's hard to live in a country in that state. For example, that's what Germany was. They lived under the Nazi occupation or in a Nazi state, and it was the same with Japan when the Second World War was going on. And that's one of the reasons I think a lot of our veterans, our Indian veterans, were so willing to join and fight for their country. They didn't want to see any kind of a war being declared on Canada or coming into Canada, so that their children, grandchildren, and the future generation would be free and be able to do as they please with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and just to live side by side with your fellow human being. Korea never ended. Korea, nobody surrendered on either side. They signed a truce. And the truce was in the making for about a year. And then finally they decided that, well, this is enough. We'll pull back. The troops pulled back on either side. The North Korean, South Korean pulled back so many miles. But when we pulled back, the Canadian Brigade, we pulled back about 10 miles, I think. There's a demarcation line between the North and the South. And that's all fenced in with concertina wire, all the rolls of wire as you see. That's dividing the North and the South. They watch each other 24 hours a day. Even though the war ended in 1953, July 27, 1953, there's still troops on either side of that fence. Nobody can come across either way, from the north or from the south. They have thousands of troops. I think they have about 40,000 troops on each side of that fence. And anybody try and sneak in there, that'll just start another war. And then the Korean War veterans, when they got their release, like the Second World War veterans, they got their discharge when they got demobilized. When they donned their uniforms off, they got a complete discharge from the armed services. For Korea, it was different because the war didn't really end. It was only a truce, so they gave you a release on the understanding that if Koreans were to start fighting again, that you could be called up any time by the government. Like even me today, all I got was a release, but now I'm too damn old to be called back anyway, so I don't worry about it. But in the days when I was discharged, I think I was only about 20 years old. And you had to be ready. If the Koreans resumed their fighting and everything, every available veteran that had gone to the Korean War and had been trained for the Korean War would be called up first. What I see about the present war now is it's altogether different. They go to Afghanistan or one of the other countries for only 6 months. 6 months, and then they come home. And the other thing that happens, which is way different from Second World War and the Korean War is when their soldiers get killed. Now they bring them home. They fly them home or ship them home one way or the other. And they have a big honor parade for them. Ours, they were buried in the country that they were killed in. We have Canadian Indians in Belgium, Germany, Holland, France. If you go to any of those countries, all you have got to do is ask for a cemetery and you'll always recognize an Indian name on one of those tombstones. You know, and those tombstones, those graves are well looked after, especially in Holland. Boy, it was the Canadian Army that freed Holland. And they have a lot of respect for the Canadians. I went over there with the Second World War veterans in 1995, and the respect that these old fellows got, I was amazed. From everybody on the street, even the young people, and where they had a Remembrance Day parade. It was so nice to see them. All young children had flowers, and they would go and put a flower on each tombstone. A whole slew of young people, children, say about 10 years old and up, honoring the Canadian soldiers that lay in that grave. It's amazing how they respect the Canadians and haven't forgotten the freedom that they got from the Canadian Armed Forces.
I would tell them, you know, you go for it. You know, you get free education, you can see the world like they probably say, and you would see a lot of places where you originally would never have been if you didn't sign up. They teach you how to be good men, and how to have be disciplined, and how to have respect. And in all, it's all good ideas, and it's good. Maybe it might be hard for the start, but once you get onto the system and you get past the hardest part, then from there on it's easy sailing, and then you'll be glad that you did. Everybody should have that. With all the discipline that they give you, you can't beat it.
You'll learn discipline. That's one thing. You really learn discipline when you're in the armed forces. You learn how to listen, how to take orders, and how to respect your fellow human being. More so with your own fellow troops. You respect each other. There's no such a thing as, well, you're no good, you can't do that. It's always commending each other. That was a good job you did there. You know, if you were on guard duty, or else if you did something terrific to protect your fellow comrades on the battlefield, that was great. But if a young, I always tell young people, if you're well behaved and willing to take orders every day, because you take orders every day in the Army, you're not free. Somebody always tells you what you have to do. The forgotten soldier, we were always aware of it. Even the First World War veterans, when they returned home, they knew that they were being forgotten. And even when they started applying for post-war benefits, and the government and Veterans Affairs were ignoring them, and after a while they soon got used to it. But there's a lot of things that came in between them. In between them was the fact here that some of them really came psychologically sick. They were shell-shocked. They didn't know what that was, shell-shocked, where you hear a bang and all of a sudden you see a person just dropping onto the ground, just like he's dodging a bullet or what's. We had a lot of our veterans like that, and they turned to alcohol to try and forget. That's why we used to see all these old veterans always drinking. And they were trying to forget. Nobody was there to help them. Because I used to hear some women say, you know, this old man, sometimes way at night, he's dreaming, he's yelling, he's screaming, and he's just like he's trying to run away from something or hiding from something. And what he's hiding from, of course, is he's still dreaming that he's in the front line fighting in the war. And it's scary. It's very scary to be confronted that, and a lot of them were really determined to try and stay alive, but it's hard to. You've got to try and do your best. You're fighting at the same time. You can't be a coward. You've got to be able to think of your fellow soldier, that he depends on you. You can't be a coward. You've got to be there with him, and he's there for you. So these are the things that the Indian soldiers, and they always say that to be and we knew we were forgotten soldiers ever since the First World War veterans were discharged. Even the Second World War veterans were the same. You never forget your comrades that you were in the front line with. You never ever forget them. Every now and then they'll come back. Any time of the day, any time of the night, you'll see their faces. You still see their faces and how they looked when they fell. And that's the sad part, is how they looked when they fell. The cringing and the moaning and everything as they are passing on. And that's the sad part about seeing a dying man on the ground beside you bleeding. And you really can't help him, even though there's medics behind that'll come and patch him up. If they can save him, they'll save him. And as far as the Korean War veterans, we always say we fought in the forgotten war. That is what Korea is known as, the forgotten war, because they didn't get no kind of recognition. When we came home from the Korean War, we just went home to be good little Indians again under the dictatorship of the Department of Indian Affairs and the Indian agent. And if you want to ask for any kind of post-war benefits, the Indian agent, if he felt like it, would try and help you. If he didn't, you were just forgotten and say, well, no, we don't have anything, we can't help you, they would say. Because I went and asked the Indian agent to approach Veterans Affairs if I can get a high school education at least. I knew a lot of the other veterans a lot of non-native veterans that got professional training. They went back to university colleges and came out of there with paraprofessional occupations and were able to get good jobs, were able to get established in their own business enterprises. Some of them went into farming, and they were very successful farmers. Indians, they weren't given that kind of opportunity. A lot of our veterans died in poverty, destitute, and nobody really thinks about that. Especially the federal government never gave it any kind of recognition, or never gave it any kind of thought. We should try and help these Indian veterans try and re-establish themselves. After all, they went through hell and high water to come back. A lot of them never came back. A lot of our veterans, a good number of our veterans are overseas, laying in their graves. War is a big game. It's a terrible game, and it's a killing game. I always call it a killing game because we lose so many good people, so many good men that have been lost and never came home, and are being missed by their parents. Were being missed by their parents that were still alive, by their wives or girlfriends, and by their children if they had children before they went off to war, and those were the ones that suffered the most. And I think it's about time that we told the people, we tell our own people, we tell the dominant society as to how the Indian veterans were treated, mistreated, and how they all died. They all died poor, sick. A lot of them died with post-traumatic stress. And I know for a fact that a lot of our veterans died with that sickness, and nobody was there to help them try and cure it or assist them in whatever way possible. Again, I thank each and every one of you. Miigwech.
I will never forget I will never forget. I will never forget.
I will never forget.
I will